The transport door hissed open, and Maya stepped into hell. The Galactic Defense Academy sprawled before her like a monument to violence, all black metal and scorched training fields. She shouldn't have been here. A clerical error had placed her name on the roster meant for species with exoskeletons, redundant organs, and natural armor. Humans didn't belong among the warriors of the galaxy. The admissions officer, a towering Krelthan with 4 arms, had made that clear when she arrived. But bureaucracy was bureaucracy, even in space, and the error wouldn't be corrected for 3 standard months. So Maya stayed. Commander Vexar noticed her immediately during the first formation. His species, the Drakvol, stood 9 feet tall, with obsidian scales and eyes like molten copper. He circled her slowly, his claws clicking against the metal deck. The other cadets, massive beings from a dozen warrior races, watched with barely concealed amusement. Vexar's lips curled back, revealing rows of serrated teeth. He didn't see a soldier. He saw an opportunity. If the human broke quickly enough, she'd become the perfect cautionary tale. A living reminder of what happened to the weak. The first day's training would have killed most species outright. Vexar designed it that way. 50 kilometers in full combat gear across terrain that shifted between volcanic rock and freezing tundra. The alien cadets finished in 4 hours, their enhanced physiology making light work of the distance. Maya took 9 hours. Her legs screamed. Her lungs burned. Blood seeped through her boots from blisters that had burst and reformed twice, but she crossed the finish line. Vexar was waiting. Disappointment etched across his scaled features. He'd expected her to quit, to cry, to beg for mercy or a transport home. Instead, Maya stood at attention, swaying slightly, her face blank. She didn't give him the satisfaction. The second week, Vexar escalated. He called it motivation. The other instructors called it what it was, punishment. Maya's training schedule doubled while everyone else's remained standard. Her rations were cut by 30%. Her rest periods were shortened to 4 hours. The alien cadets whispered among themselves, a mix of pity and scorn. Some laughed openly. A few felt uncomfortable but said nothing. Vexar wanted her to break, and breaking seemed inevitable. Humans were fragile. Everyone knew that. Soft skin, single hearts, slow healing. They were scientists and diplomats, not warriors. But something strange began to happen. Maya's body started adapting. Her times improved. Not dramatically. Not enough to threaten the alien cadets' superiority, but enough to be noticed. She completed a 48-hour endurance march that left 3 Krelthans in medical bay. She survived a combat simulation in sub-zero temperatures that caused a Thoraxian's secondary respiratory system to fail. Vexar watched the reports with growing frustration. The human should have collapsed by now, should have begged to leave. Instead, she kept going, her brown eyes fixed forward, her jaw set in grim determination. By the 4th week, the mockery had quieted. The alien cadets still outperformed her in raw strength and speed, but something unsettling crept into their observations. Maya never stopped. During hand-to-hand drills, stronger opponents would knock her down and she'd rise. Again. And again. Her technique was sloppy, her power insufficient, but her persistence was inhuman. A Drakvol cadet named Threxus cornered her after one particularly brutal session. He was twice her size, his scales thick as armor plating. He demanded to know her secret. How did she keep going when her body should have given out days ago? Maya looked up at him, exhausted beyond measure, and said simply, "I don't know how to quit." Vexar's frustration transformed into obsession. The human's resilience wasn't just unexpected, it was becoming embarrassing. His carefully designed punishment regimen had failed to break her, and worse, some cadets had begun to respect her. That couldn't stand. He convened with the senior staff and proposed a final solution. A 70-hour live-fire survival exercise in the Academy's most dangerous training zone. The Canyon of Shattered Worlds was a nightmarish terrain of unstable gravity wells, automated defense turrets, and environmental hazards that shifted without warning. Cadets trained there in teams of 5, and even then, injuries were common. Vexar would send Maya alone. The announcement came during morning formation. Vexar's voice boomed across the assembly grounds as he explained the special training exercise designed specifically for their human classmate. He framed it as an opportunity, a chance for Maya to prove human worth, but everyone understood the truth. This was an execution dressed up as education. The alien cadets shifted uncomfortably. A few exchanged glances. This wasn't training anymore. This was cruelty. But no one spoke up. Vexar was a decorated commander, a hero of the last sector war. Who were they to question his methods? Maya stood silent as Vexar outlined the parameters. 72 hours, no support, no extraction unless she activated her emergency beacon, which would mean automatic failure and expulsion. Standard combat load only. She had 6 hours to prepare. When he dismissed her, she saluted and walked to the equipment bay without a word. Her hands didn't shake as she checked her weapon. Her expression didn't change as she inventoried her supplies. Inside, her mind was already working, already adapting. Humans had survived ice ages and predators and plagues. She'd survive this too. The canyon swallowed her whole. Gravity shifted beneath her feet, making every step a calculated risk. Automated turrets tracked her movement, firing plasma rounds that scorched the air inches from her head. The temperature swung from blistering heat to freezing cold within minutes. Most species would have activated their beacon within the first 6 hours. Maya made it through the first day by never stopping. When turrets forced her to ground, she crawled. When gravity wells threatened to crush her, she waited them out in shallow depressions. Her body pressed flat against the rocks. She didn't sleep. Couldn't afford to. Human evolutionary traits kicked in, the same instincts that had allowed her ancestors to chase prey for days across African plains. Her body shifted into a metabolic state designed for persistence, for endurance beyond reason. The Academy's monitoring station tracked her progress with growing disbelief. Vexar watched the feeds obsessively, waiting for the moment she'd break. But Maya kept moving. By the second day, she'd figured out the turret patterns and was using them to her advantage, timing her movements to stay in dead zones. She'd adapted to the gravity fluctuations, reading the terrain for telltale signs of instability. She was using guerrilla tactics, human tactics, things the combat algorithms hadn't been programmed to expect. When a Thoraxian training squad entered the canyon for their scheduled team exercise, they found evidence of her passage, carefully arranged rocks marking safe paths, scratched warnings about turret coverage. She was thinking, adapting, surviving. The alien cadets began gathering at the monitoring station. At first out of morbid curiosity, then out of genuine interest, and finally out of something approaching awe. A Krelthan named Zephix muttered that his own team had barely survived 36 hours in the canyon with full support. The human was at 50 hours and still moving. Drexus, the Drakful who'd questioned her before, watched the feeds in silence. He trained in the canyon twice, both times with elite squadmates. Even with his species' natural armor and strength, it had been hell. The human had neither advantage. She had only will. Dower 68. Maya's body was failing. She knew it intellectually, could feel the shutdown beginning in her extremities. Dehydration, exhaustion, and accumulated damage were taking their toll, but her mind refused the body's surrender. This was what humans did. This was what made them human. They didn't have claws or scales or redundant organs. They had something better, the ability to look at impossible odds and keep moving anyway. Her ancestors had hunted animals faster and stronger than themselves. By simply refusing to stop until the prey collapsed from exhaustion, she was the inheritor of that legacy. So she kept moving. Vexar stared at the monitors, his copper eyes wide with something he refused to name. Fear. The human was going to complete it. Against every projection, every biological analysis, every assumption about human fragility, she was going to survive his punishment. Around him, the gathered cadets had gone silent. They weren't watching a failure anymore. They were watching something else entirely, something that made their scales itch and their secondary hearts quicken. They were watching a predator. Maya crossed the extraction zone at hour 71, 47 minutes. She didn't activate her beacon. She walked the final distance on legs that should have been broken, her eyes tracking threats with mechanical precision. When the exit portal opened, she stepped through into the equipment bay and immediately collapsed. Medical teams rushed forward, but she waved them off, forcing herself to stand. Vexar was waiting, his expression unreadable. He opened his mouth to speak, perhaps to dismiss her performance or minimize her achievement. Maya looked him dead in the eye and said, "When does the next training exercise begin, sir?" The challenge was issued 3 days later. Vexar, unable to accept the implications of Maya's success, invoked an ancient academy tradition, trial by combat. It was supposed to be voluntary, but everyone understood the pressure Maya faced. Refuse, and she'd always be marked as someone who'd merely survived, not excelled. Accept, and she'd face a Drakval warrior with decades of combat experience in a sanctioned fight that could easily turn lethal. Maya accepted before Vexar finished explaining the rules. The combat arena filled to capacity. Cadets from every species crowded the observation decks. Word had spread beyond the academy. This wasn't just a fight. This was a test of everything the galaxy believed about humans. Vexar entered the ring in full ceremonial armor, his scales polished to obsidian perfection. Maya wore standard combat gear, looking impossibly small across from him. The referee, a neutral Quarian magistrate, outlined the rules. No lethal force. Fight continues until submission or incapacitation. Vexar's smile was predatory. This would be quick. It wasn't. Vexar had strength, armor, reach, and experience. Maya had persistence. Every time he knocked her down, she got up. Every time his claws opened new wounds. She adapted her strategy. She couldn't overpower him, so she didn't try. Instead, she wore him down. Humans had evolved to outlast their prey, to keep coming no matter how many times they were hurt. Vexar's heavy armor became a liability as the fight stretched past 10 minutes, then 20, then 30. His breathing grew labored. His movements slowed. Maya's didn't. She was bleeding from a dozen cuts. One eye swollen shut, but her pace never changed. She just kept coming. At minute 43, Vexar made a mistake. Exhaustion caused him to overextend on a strike. Maya slipped inside his guard and struck his knee joint, the one weak point in Drakval anatomy. He stumbled. She pressed the advantage with relentless efficiency, not giving him time to recover. Another strike to the same knee. Then another. Vexar went down, his massive frame hitting the arena floor with a metallic crash. Maya stood over him, swaying, barely conscious but still standing. The referee called the match. The arena erupted. The Academy's senior leadership convened an emergency session that night. The footage from the canyon and the arena fight had already spread across military networks. Questions were being asked at the highest levels of Galactic Command. How had intelligence assessments missed this? If one human could do this, what could humanity do collectively? The reports began to shift. Biological analyses were reassessed. Combat doctrine was revised. Within a week, humans were reclassified from non-combat auxiliary species to apex persistence predators. Extreme caution advised. Vexar was quietly reassigned to a research post on the far side of the galaxy. The official record noted his exemplary service and recommended new training approaches. The unofficial truth was that he'd nearly triggered a diplomatic incident by underestimating an allied species. Maya graduated top of her class in endurance, survival, and adaptive tactics. She was offered command positions, research opportunities, and speaking engagements. She turned them all down except one, instructor position at the Academy. Someone needed to teach the galaxy what humans were really capable of. And someone needed to make sure no instructor ever mistook training for punishment again. Because humans didn't break under pressure. They evolved. They adapted. They persisted. And they never, ever quit.